All right, so hopefully you're in the right place. We're going to talk about deploying Outlook Mobile securely and simply. All right, so the agenda today, we're going to talk about why you should choose Outlook Mobile for your productivity solution for your organizations. We're going to talk about what makes Outlook Mobile uniquely secure. And then we're going to talk about how you can actually deploy Outlook Mobile to your organizations in the way to leverage our secure technology. So first off, brief intros, because we're going to be hanging out for the next hour. My name is Lexi Torres. I'm a cat lady. Just want to put that out there. I'm also an Apple defector. So fun fact, I used to work for Apple as an engineer and an engineering manager. And I started working for Microsoft because I think that Microsoft is doing really cool things in the mobile space, which I think says a lot about the direction the company is going. I'm also, like I said, a Microsoft mobility expert and a data protection evangelist, so you won't find me on Facebook. If you want to follow up later, please tweet at me at Outlook or at Lexi_MSFT. Cool, so that's a little bit about me. Let's talk about you. So as organizations, we know that you're going through a lot of transformations. So with the digital age, we went from paper communications to email communications. And now with the mobile age, we're moving from on-premises into cloud and mobile. Your workforces are also changing too. So I'll tell you a story. On my way here, I connected in Istanbul before I got to Amsterdam, and my flight was delayed 30 minutes. So when I got off the flight, I was scrambling to get to my gate in time. And in the meantime, my manager had sent me an email asking for a question about contact management on Outlook for Android, which is one of my domain spaces. So I was responding to her and running through the airport to catch my flight. And I also was trying to get my coworker the deck that I'd been working on for this presentation. I was doing this all on my phone while I was in transit, literally from one country to another. So my point is that 93% of your workforce are using their mobile phones, and a third of the time they're using them to get work done. So we know that this is the case for going forward, and Microsoft is here to give you the productivity software you need so that your workforce stays productive from any device, anywhere, and stays secure. So let's talk about why Outlook Mobile is better than the built-in apps that come with your devices. So first off, Microsoft designed software with security as a principle and not as a nice to have. We get the enterprises, we know how important it is for you to secure your organization's data. And so when we're deciding how to design, we think about, well, how can we make sure that, this scenario is a secure scenario? Because we know that your users are going to find creative workarounds if we don't make it a beautiful user experience. Like if we don't give you an easy way to save to OneDrive for Business, they're going to figure out how to save that document to Dropbox. And we want to keep that from happening. So we also work closely with the rest of the Office apps to build you cross-app scenarios. I work very closely with the Word, Excel, PowerPoint team to bring you experiences so that you have the full power of the Office suite at your fingertips. Has this ever happened to you where you're like on an email thread and there's a lot of people piling on with their opinions about what they think you should be doing next? And then you're like, you guys, we should just have a meeting about this. So Outlook makes that really easy to do because we have a beautiful calendar experience that's built into the Outlook app. And you can easily schedule a meeting from your email as a jumping off point. I personally worked on this feature. We integrate with the free Busy service so that you can see your attendees' availability right from Outlook Mobile. I actually prefer to schedule all my meetings now from Outlook Mobile because I think our calendar is one of the best ones that Outlook has to offer. So finally, Microsoft is a big player in the intelligence space. We're putting intelligence as the forefront of several of our scenarios. So for instance, we do intelligent stamping on your calendar. When you book a business flight, you'll see that show up in Outlook without having to add it yourself. I've personally been working really closely with the LinkedIn team since our LinkedIn acquisition a couple years ago to bring you LinkedIn experiences into Outlook. It's coming soon. So pretty soon you'll have a beautiful people card that's decorated with LinkedIn data. We also have like helpful scenarios to get you to your meetings on time with time to leave so that you're never late showing up to something important. So that was the why choose Outlook. Let's talk about what makes Outlook Mobile uniquely secure. I'm going to cover 4 things in this talk. We're going to talk about the underpinnings of the architecture. We're going to talk about how we secure access to the service. We'll talk about securing the mobile client itself. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about securing the data in Office 365. I expect some of you will have some questions for me. If you can hold those till after the talk, I'll be outside and then I'll be in the expo hall later and we can talk about your specific scenarios. So first, let's talk about the basics of our architecture and why it's very secure. So up until now, like this is how our connectivity model has been structured. We have the mobile client connecting to a stateless protocol translator that lives in Azure. There's no mailbox data stored here. This is simply a translator between a mobile-specific API and the REST API. The REST API talks to Exchange Online. If you want to check out the REST API, it's publicly documented. Now, we have on either side of the connection, it's secured with TLS 1.2 and certificate pending done on the client side. How many of y'all have an on-premises setup? See a few. Okay. So if you do have on-premises, we highly recommend using hybrid modern authentication. And what this does is it gives us a hybrid relationship between an O365 mailbox and your on-premises mailbox. I'm going to go into a lot of detail about that in a few slides. There's 2 key benefits from that setup. First, you get the full benefits of the Exchange Online security offerings. And second, we reduce latency because we don't have to connect directly to the on-prem mailbox. We could just connect to the O365 instance. So to summarize, the connection is encrypted with TLS 1.2, and in both cases, we recommend we use modern authentication, which means the credentials are never stored on the device. So now, starting in January, fully transparent to our users, we're migrating mailboxes off of the previous model and onto the native Microsoft Sync stack. So what that means is that now we have a single, uninterrupted, encrypted connection between the mobile client and Office 365. So this has several benefits over the previous model I just showed you. There's no middle tier service. So now we have all your data is within the Office 365 boundary. So that tightens our security core. And then let's go into some of the other benefits. So like I said, no middle tier services. We've taken Azure out of the equation. There's a single uninterrupted encrypted connection now between the app and Office 365. This allows us to support other Office 365 instances like sovereign clouds. This gives us a reduction in latency because we've removed the proprietary API that we use to connect the mobile client to the translator, and we've removed the stateless protocol translator as well. So one of my favorite things about this new sync stack is that we get to unlock new features that have been available on the Windows 10 Mail app for years. So for instance, SMIME, I'm sure some of you are excited about that. It's going to be coming soon, as well as information protection labeling and shared mailboxes. So I see some nods. Yes, shared mailboxes. Woo! So we're rolling this out, and those features are in progress. They've been in progress actually for the last 6 months to a year, and so those are going to light up as soon as this is fully deployed to all of our users. So finally, one of the other big advantages of moving to the native Microsoft Sync stack is that we've consolidated our protocols for the different Outlook endpoints. So up until this point, we had each one of our Outlook endpoints on a different protocol. Some were on REST and some were on the native Sync stack. And then we have like some really old legacy stuff the desktop is on. But what this lets us do is now we do all of the sync and data work in one layer, and then we have client development happening on top. And so we cut down our development cycles, and we increase our agility and throughput of features. So like we've heard a lot of complaints from users like, why is this feature available in Outlook for iOS and it's not available in Outlook for Android? So theoretically, we're going to be solving that issue by consolidating the protocol to all be on the Microsoft native sync stack. So based on what we just went over, all of this uses modern authentication. That's also known as OAuth, which means no credentials are stored on the device. We fully support multi-factor authentication as well. Our recommended MFA is using the Microsoft Authenticator app, but you can also use text messaging and phone calls if you prefer. That's up to you to decide. The video on the right is showing you what that looks like for the user when they log in. So I'm just going to let it cycle through one more time. So now the user's entering their password. Okay, so see now they have a notification coming from the Authenticator app asking for them to approve. They approve it. And now Outlook for Android loads their mail. So it's really that simple. Now, another advantage of using modern authentication is that if this user now installs another app from the Office suite, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, we're going to share that token with ADAL. ADAL is going to share that token with the other apps. And so they don't even have to re-authenticate. They don't have to enter their credentials again. They're just going to be seeing their account pop up and say, is this the account you want to add? And you say yes, and then that's it. You're logged in. So that's our single sign-on experience, and that all works with the Active Directory authentication library, which we also call ADAL. So another way that you can increase identity protection is by using a certificate-based authentication. Who here is using ADFS? Okay, several of you. So for those of you that are using ADFS, you can leverage certificate-based authentication. This does require that you have the Microsoft Authenticator app on iOS, Android 5.0 or later. If your apps are managed by Intune or Intune enrolled, you can push certificate to the device that way. You could also deliver it through OneDrive or other methods. As long as there's a valid certificate on the device, it's going to work. And you'll see the video on the right is also similar to the previous flow where the user just enters their information and then we detect the certificates there and we can load their account. So I'm just going to let that play through one more time. Almost there. Okay, cool. All right, so before I mentioned hybrid modern authentication. So I'm going to walk you through what we're actually doing on the service side so that you can see how secure this is. So the first thing that's going to happen is that the client is going to call into Azure Auto Detect. Auto Detect is going to call into the Exchange Online mailbox. That's going to issue a 302 redirect to the on-premises mailbox. And from there, we call the Auto Discover in the on-premises environment, and we're going to get the email endpoint back to Auto Detect. Auto Detect will then issue a empty bearer challenge to the on-premises mailbox, which will return the AAD endpoint and give us the OAuth URL. So now we can actually start the user through that authentication flow that we just checked out. So that could happen in various different ways, like we looked at, multi-factor authentication. You could go through certificates as well. So once the user authenticates through Azure Active Directory, we're going to get a refresh token back. With that refresh token, we take the endpoint URL. We're going to go through the stateless protocol translator and a provisioning API to the Exchange Online mailbox. Using the token we have, we're going to get a second access token. which is going to let us authenticate to the on-prem mailbox. At this point, mailbox replication is going to happen if it hasn't already. So now with that token, we're going to be able to sync the mail between the Exchange Online mailbox and the on-premises mailbox. And we're going to continue to refresh that token as needed. So the important takeaways from this technical overview is that we're exposing AutoDiscover and ActiveSync online. The data sync happens over authenticated service. The user credentials are not cached on the device. The Microsoft client never connects directly to the on-prem mailbox. Again, we talked about the latency gains that we get there by going to Exchange Online. Connections occur all in the Microsoft cloud, and third-party MDMs are supported, as well as our recommended provider of Intune. Okay, so we talked about the architecture. Let's talk about securing access to the service itself. How do we get the data out of Office 365 and onto the device? So we do that through something called conditional access. So conditional access is a policy-based approach, a policy-driven approach that's based on an if-then system. So we have a collection of assignments and conditions, and if those are met, then we take an action. We either allow or we block access. If we allow access, we can follow with what we call grant controls, and I'll go into specifics of what those are and how they work. So the assignments are scoped to the user groups in the client apps. The conditions could be conditions such as, is this user trying to connect from iOS or from Android, from a Windows client? Locations, we can detect the IP address. We're able to see whether or not you're trying to connect from a basic auth client or a modern authentication client or from a browser. There's two types of conditional access. One's device-based conditional access, where we make sure that the device is compliant with whatever policies you set up, like for instance, requiring a PIN or a minimum operating system version. And then there's app-based conditional access, which I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. So app-based conditional access, the user is going to log into AAD. AAD is going to talk to the Azure STS, as the secure token service, to see if Intune has issued that this user has app protection policies applied. So if the user does have app protection policies applied, we're going to get a token back. And with that token, we can connect to Exchange Online. So this is app-based conditional access protection model, which leverages Intune. So this will require a broker app to be installed on the device as well. On iOS, it's going to be the Microsoft Authenticator app, and on Android, it's going to be Company Portal. So we talked a little bit about grant controls, so we're going to go into the specifics of what you can do with them and what they are. So the first one is requiring multi-factor authentication. That allows us to have advanced security around your identity. So in order to do that, there has to be another authentication method besides username and password. Our recommended broker for this is going to be the Microsoft Authenticator app, but you could also use text and phone calls as a way to validate as well. Require device to be marked as compliant. We'll check to see that the device is meeting a minimum operating system version, has a device pin set, is not rooted or jailbroken. We can do all of that with the require device to be marked as compliant. That requires device enrollment. Finally, require approved client app, and this is the one that we hear from you about the most, and this is the one we're going to go into most detail, is requiring that only Outlook is used to access corporate email. So in order to do that, we support first-party Office apps that have the Intune SDK integrated, which of course Outlook is among those. Right now, we check a static whitelist in Azure that tells us whether or not this app matches with one of the apps that's in the whitelist. And this does require that the app is Intune managed. In addition to these grant controls, Intune is continuing to work with Office 365 to give you more control and granularity around adding your own line of business apps and making that list dynamic instead of static. So that's coming soon. So let's look at an example of the scenario where you say you want to restrict access to corporate mail to only be in Outlook Mobile. First thing we're going to do is we're going to set up this user. Her name's Jane. Jane is going to be allowed to access all Office 365 EXO apps. So that means Word, Excel, PowerPoint as well. We're going to set the condition to be scoped to mobile, so iOS or Android for the device platforms. And then we're going to say modern authentication enabled client apps can connect. So now if Jane tries to connect through a modern authentication enabled client, we're going to apply the grant control that if she meets these conditions, we require the approved client app of Outlook. So if she tries to connect through Outlook, no problem. We let her load her email. Now, what happens if Jane tries to connect through another modern authentication enabled client like iOS Mail? Well, in that case, we're going to block her access. And because iOS Mail does not match that static list in Azure, we're going to send, ADOL is going to send her a email saying, hey, you need to install Outlook in order to unblock yourself. So that second part is really key because we're trying to give Jane the tools that she needs to unblock herself in self-service so that doesn't come back on you as the admins of this tenant to tell her what she's doing wrong. So we're not done there. We've set up a conditional access policy for modern authentication clients, but as we know, most mail clients use basic authentication. So what do we do there? We're going to have a second conditional access policy. Again, we're going to scope this to Jane and Office 365 Exchange Online clients. Now we're going to set the client app to be basic auth, so EAS. The grant control in this situation, this is going to seem counterintuitive, but we're actually going to set the grant control to be require approved client app, and I'll show you why. So in this case, if Jane logs in with a basic auth client and it doesn't match the static list that we have in Azure, she's going to be quarantined by Exchange Online, and she's going to be given an email that says, you need to install Outlook. So if you had set your conditional access policy grant control to be block access, then you wouldn't have gotten that quarantine email. So this is our recommendation, even though it seems a little bit counterintuitive. So you're going to allow access if she has a basic auth client, but you're going to reroute her to required approved client app so she gets this quarantine email. So there's another conditional access policy that you can apply to make your service, you can make this even more secure. So before I get into specifics, there's a little bit of background here. So Microsoft collects trillions of data from different sources like Windows Advanced Threat Protection, Exchange Advanced Threat Protection, Windows Defender, in order to create this advanced security graph. So that security graph, we feed into services like Azure Active Directory so that we can see that data and we can make a decision based on the threat that the user might pose to their environment. So the types of things that we can do when we look at the data are like require multi-factor authentication, force a password reset, deny or block access. So in order to get all this information, we check all of our authentication attempts, we scrape the dark web, and we work with law enforcement to build this security graph. In order to take advantage of this, you enable the Azure Identity Protection module within Azure Active Directory. So now you're using sign-in as an additional conditional access policy. So I'll give you an example of what that looks like. Okay, so let's take, for example, my friend Dana. She's a VP of marketing at a spa in California, and she has higher privileges and access to data because of her status at the company. So she was just traveling to London, and then 5 hours later, she was seen in Paris, which is a believable travel scenario that doesn't seem strange. However, she's had multiple failed sign-in attempts. So what we'll do is we'll elevate her conditional access risk from low to medium, and then we'll follow with the grant control to require multi-factor authentication. So this way, Dana can still authenticate herself and access her email, but the would-be hacker, if there was one, would not be able to. Let's look at another example. So in this case, we have Blair, who's a sales account representative. She doesn't have additional privileges because of her status in the company, but we're not able to detect her IP address. So we already elevate her access risk to medium. And in addition to that, we can see that her credentials were leaked online to the dark web. So we're going to elevate it to high. So now what we can do is we can block access and we can force a password reset for this user. So in this way, we're able to take a proactive approach to protecting your environment versus a reactive one where we're dealing with compromised mailbox accounts. And this is all up to you and how you want to set up conditional access for your tenant. Okay, so we talked about the basic architecture. We talked about securing access to the service. Now we're going to talk about securing the mobile client itself, which is my specialty, actually. So this is the exciting part of the presentation, you guys. Yes. All right, so let's talk about the basics. When we talk about remote device management, how many of y'all are using remote device management today? MDM of some form. Cool. All right. So there are two flavors. This is pretty basic for most of you, but mobile device management, which is not specific to any particular company, but is agnostic to Microsoft or AirWatch or Mobile Iron. And we can use the platform channels in order to push profile or configuration keys to the mobile client. There's another flavor of this called mobile app management, which we refer to as MAM, and that is an Intune specific offering. And that gives us a containerized approach. So we're not managing the entire device. We're just managing the managed apps on the device. So when we're talking about MDM and remote device management for iOS, it's pretty simple. You have the Intune SDK, which we've baked into Outlook for iOS. That talks to the iOS platform MDM channel, which, like I said before, is agnostic, that could work with any EMM provider. We're going to get configuration keys pushed from Intune from Azure, and we'll take those keys and we'll make some changes on the client and apply them to your app. So the screenshot on the right shows you something that actually is launching today, and you guys are the first ones to hear about it because it doesn't go live until 10 a.m. Pacific time. So this is a release I've been working on for the last year, and it's going to give you the ability to push some configurations to devices to Outlook over MDM. And when those new configurations are pushed, the user is going to get a notification in the app telling them that your IT admin has made a change, so something might be different in your app. So what we've been doing with this release is to try to build a responsive UI in Outlook so that it reduces the support volume that you have to deal with when you push out a new configuration to your apps. We'll talk a little bit more about what exactly we're launching in a second. So now if you use Android, how many Android users do we have? Quite a few. Okay, cool. So if you're using Android, then are you using Work Profile as well? See, okay, great. So Work Profile is a little bit more, you could say, interesting, complicated than iOS. As you know, we get a separate partition actually on the mobile client that's dedicated to the Work Profile managed apps. The way that this works with our technology is when the device wakes up, it's going to talk to the company portal, which is our broker app with Intune. The company portal is going to check the Intune configuration in Azure to see if there's been any changes made to the configuration profile on the device. If there have been any configuration changes, then we're going to push those through REST to the Google Cloud, and the Google Cloud is going to push those down to the device. So this is the round trip for Work Profile, which is a little bit different than iOS because there's more going on here with the Google Cloud. So one of the first things that I did with the MDM profile push work was to try to give admins an easy way to onboard their users into Outlook Mobile with a workflow that looks a lot like single sign-on. So what this is the ability for you to push down your mailbox setup configurations to the device, even if you have auto detect disabled in your tenant. This is pretty simple and basic, and I don't know how many of you would take advantage of this, but this is the first thing that we did with MDM Profile Push. The next thing that we did is we gave you the ability to restrict Outlook Mobile to only have your organization's mailbox added. So that means the user can't add Gmail, they can't add Outlook.com. And we do that through a configuration called org allowed accounts. Org allowed accounts will also update the UI of the app itself, which it'll tell the user, instead of this normally says add account, it'll say add corporate account. And if they try to add a personal account, we give them some messaging that says, sorry, you can't add that account. Because your IT admin has decided this is just for org allowed accounts only. Again, we're trying to do as much as we can to reduce the number of questions you guys are going to have to deal with when your users realize that on their personal devices, you're making changes to their apps. The next thing that we released, which was in the last month, is the ability to enable mail tips for external recipients, which is something we've heard from you many times that you need. You can push this through a app config to the device. We actually turned this on by default for O365 accounts a week ago in iOS and 2 weeks ago on Android. But if you want to turn it off, you can do that through an MDM configuration. So the new thing that's happening that you guys are the first ones to hear about, there are a couple things. So how many of y'all are using Intune? Awesome, my people. Thank you. All right, so I work really closely with the Intune team. I had them build this lovely UI for us. And this is actually an Outlook tab now within the app configuration in Intune. These are the settings that you will now be able to push through a profile over MDM. So focused inbox, turn it on or off. Require biometrics like Face ID or Touch ID to access the app. Save contacts. And then on Android, this is sync contacts, because the model there is a little bit different. External recipient mail tip, like we just talked about, and block external images. So what I think you guys are going to really like is that you have the ability for some of these settings to also stop the user from changing your choice. So if you set block external images to be, turned on, and you want to say, no, it's a security issue, we're not going to let you turn that off, then you can block them from making that change in the app. And if they try to change it, then we have, again, a responsive UI that's going to tell the user, your IT admin has set this as something that you can't change. So you'll see that in this message here. Now, for block external images, even if you have this set at an app level, if the user has on their individual email, they decide they want to download the image, they can do that. But they have to make that decision on an email level versus the entire app. All right, so to summarize, remote device management with MDM gives you app configuration, helps you manage your device inventory. You can issue device wipes. You can push the app to the device itself, and you can set device configuration. Now, all of this still requires device enrollment, which we know that many users, we have like a BYOD scenario for most organizations where they don't necessarily want their IT admin to have full governance over their personal phone. They think that's a little bit too much. So for that, our solution for giving you control, but without having the complete, responsibility of a personal device, is MAM, Mobile App Management. So the architecture for that is pretty simple. The Outlook app ships with the Intune SDK, which talks to the app configuration in Intune to find out, what policies you've set for that app. So we can talk about what all you can do with MAM. So first, data access. So MAM is built on the identity construct. This is really key because we think it's important that the user has the ability to still add their personal account to Outlook if they want to. But for you as the IT admin that you have complete autonomy over their corporate account. So all of these app protection policies are tied to the identity of that corporate account. So data access, you can enforce PIN, like we talked about, biometrics. You can check the device health, make sure it's not been rooted or jailbroken. You can also require an operating system version, certain app SDK versions. We give you a lot of granularity here to control the environment of the data through app protection policies, or the environment of the device through app protection policies. You also have the ability to restrict data transfer from one app to another and within the app. So if a user, if you have this policy turned on, if a user tries to copy text out of Outlook and into an unmanaged application on their phone, when they copy and they go paste, instead of pasting that text, they're going to get a message that says, your organization's data cannot be pasted here. Sorry, that's blocked. So data transfer is also gives you a lot of control here. If you can block the ability for them to switch the account, we have an account picker in Outlook so that if I'm creating a new event, I can create it on my Gmail or I can create it on my corporate account. You can actually say, hey, if that event originated from your organization's calendar, you can't switch it to your personal calendar. So we'll disable the ability for them to switch the account picker in Outlook if you have this policy turned on. So also, finally, data protection. You can issue a wipe of data if you think that something shady is going on that device. That can be admin initiated. It can also be initiated if the end user has a certain time of inactivity and they haven't checked back in with Intune and you're not certain that they're the ones using that device. And then also offline if you're not able to detect that the user's active as well. So let's look at the actual policies themselves. So these are ones that I've worked on. So I don't know about you guys, but if you use ActiveSync and Outlook, there might be some data in your contacts that you don't necessarily want to sync to the local contact storage. I actually have a customer, a bank, who won't be named, but they use some legacy technology where they store social security numbers in the notes field of contacts, which is a big no-no. And so because of that, we built the controls so that you can go through each attribute in a contacts and you can say which ones you're allowing to sync to the native contact storage. Obviously, you need first name, last name, email address, phone number if you want to get caller ID working. But do you need all those other fields? Up to you to decide. So you also have the ability to block wearables in case you have a top secret meeting that you need to get notified about and you don't want that showing up on your watch when you're at dinner with your family. You can, because you're an FBI agent, I don't know, you can block that based on mail or calendar. You have the granularity to do that with MAM. All right, so let's look at an example. So let's look at my friend Blair. Blair is going to add her corporate account to Outlook Mobile. We're going to get a few policies for her. So we have a copy, paste, and save as controls enabled. PIN is required and encrypt storage. So first thing she has to do is set a PIN. She's going to do that. So then she's going to open an email and she sees some text that's interesting and she copies it. And, muscle memory is I'm going to open the Notes app on my phone and save it there because that's what we do. But because she has the policy to block copy paste unless it's in a managed app, she's going to get that message that says, sorry, your organization's data cannot be pasted here. So instead, she's going to remember that Microsoft has this great Notes app called OneNote. She's going to download OneNote, and we're going to use single sign-on with her ADOL token to log her in so she doesn't even have to enter her username or password. It just works. And now she's going to be able to save that text to OneNote. So for you as the IT admins, you know that your organization's data is staying right where you want it to stay within your Office 365 compliance boundary. Okay, so to summarize, remote device management with MAM gives you the ability to push app policies, app configuration, issue app wipes, and have app self-service. And all of this can be done without device enrollment. Okay, so let's talk about the last piece, which is securing the data in Office 365 itself. So if a customer issue comes to me, I don't have access to any of your data. That's really important that you understand. Microsoft does not have access to your data. It's your data. So I need to request access to your data using a well-understood and audited process with Lockbox. So you can even be part of this approval flow if you want to be. The vast majority of things we don't need to access your data to fix, but if we do, we want to make sure that this is an authoritative, audited process. So what that looks like, I don't know if you guys can see my arrows because it's so light, but there are arrows going from that one to that one. They're not just floating blue bubbles. So the customer would say, hey, Microsoft employee, my data is corrupted. I need you to help me fix something. At that point, the Microsoft engineer is going to submit a request to the Lockbox system, which, by the way, you can audit this and you can see who has accessed your data and when. Based on what approvals are needed, that's going to go through an approval process. And now that customer data is going to be available so that we can fix whatever problem you've identified. So what the important takeaway here is that we are custodians of your data. We are not owners of your data. You have complete autonomy and control. And you can also have that ability to see who exactly has been peeking into your mailbox and what's been going on there. So we covered a lot. We talked about why choosing Outlook for iOS and Outlook for Android is going to make your users super happy. We talked about the security and compliance controls that we've built specifically to make your lives as admins easier. We talked about the launch that's happening today that you guys got an early preview of. And we talked about how to deploy Outlook securely to your enterprises so that you can leverage the power of security in Office 365. So you can find me at the Expo Hall later if you have any questions. And I'll hang back here for a few minutes as well. But that wraps up our talk for today. Thank you so much for coming.